The work that we're going to look at tonight comes from our Keys to Early Writing, which is a 2-day professional development offering that we have at Keys to Literacy. And it covers many different things. K-2. If you can just remember to mute, that would be great. Thanks. And what we're going to talk about is an instructional framework. And these pieces are meant to really build your background knowledge so that everything we talk about, it doesn't matter what program or curriculum you're using, you can make instructional decisions for your students about how to help grow them as writers. Okay. There's a lot that's covered in early writing, but for us today with our 1 hour, we're going to really focus on syntax and sentences, okay? So we'll jump right into this. As we're thinking about growing strong writers, we want to really have in mind what is the developmental progression for composing. And what we want to think about is that collaboration plays a really important part to this. And we have another slide that we use that shows the importance of oral language, and writing really kind of floats on this sea of talk. And we know that with the collaboration piece, we want to allow students the opportunity to collaborate with both peers and teachers throughout. So kids start very early with the scribbling, then they move into drawing and labels and lists and phrases, and ultimately we want to move them over into their sentence writing. But what we also know is that sometimes in school, we haven't always valued the place for drawing. And we want to acknowledge that drawing has a really important part in helping grow strong writers, okay? So we're kind of in this progression for tonight's meeting, really going to focus at the sentence level. And as we do that, what I want to draw your attention to is, it doesn't really matter if you're in a state where you're using Common Core or if you have your own state literacy standards, is that this comes in 2 places. So first, you would see this in the actual writing standards. So in Common Core, there are 10 of those, right? But also this work really lives in the language standards. And so in those language standards, they really articulate the sentence level work that we need to be doing with our students. And what's nice when you look at those language standards is that you'll see it says orally and in writing, okay? And it's also, we have many teachers who say, what exactly should I be teaching at 1st grade? What should I be teaching at 2nd grade? Those language standards are a really nice place for you to be able to use that as a resource as you look at what research indicates as best practice and what's outlined in those language standards, okay? As we're thinking about building these strong sentences, we know that our students come to us with many, many different backgrounds, right? And what we know is that the level of syntactic awareness that students bring is heavily influenced on their exposure to oral language in their early years. So by 2 years old, kids can tell the difference between the sentence, mommy is calling daddy versus daddy is calling mommy, right? So the arrangement of words there, they can hear what that does to the meaning, okay? By the time they're in kindergarten, this syntactic awareness continues to grow. And so if you were to give 2 different sentences, swims the turtle or the turtle swims, and say to students, which one sounds right? By kindergarten, many would be able to identify the turtle swims if they had that underlying syntactic awareness, okay? And this is what we refer to as developing their sentence sense. Now, when we're thinking about this role of sentences, we want to think about that as it relates to both orally as well as in writing or composing. And what we know are sentences are like building blocks. And one by one, they communicate the message of the writer. And we need to, as the reader, be able to make meaning out of that. So we want to think about, well, how do sentences affect both comprehension as well as written expression? Okay. There's so much value in doing this sentence work with your students. And I think in the past, sometimes there was such a rush to get our students to paragraph that we didn't take enough time in the sentence level, or we felt like we had to keep going. And what we know is the paragraph will come, and that spending time helping kids understand sentences from both the perspective of a reader and a writer really is impactful. So one of the other things that sorry, feedback. One of the other things that we talk about at Keys to Literacy is setting goals with our students. Courtney, I don't know if you can find.
Yeah, I'm scrolling, trying to find who it is. Okay. If you are unmuted, make sure you mute yourself, please.
Okay. Great. So we want to engage kids in the writing process. And what we know is that as early as kindergarten, they can set goals for themselves with our guidance and support. And so here's an example of bringing kids into the community of writers by helping them identify what is it that they want to be working on. So are they working on sounding out words, using finger spaces, telling you more, making the words easy to read? And it's not that one of these is more important than the other. What we want to do is help our students be able to have small, manageable pieces that they're working on. So, for example, in sample 1 here, Connor was working on connecting his illustration to his words. And this says how to ride a bike. And here he is riding his bike. Okay. In this writer's goal, right, they were really focusing on spacing. Look at these nice spaces. Okay, we made a snowman. So the idea is that when you engage kids in generating their own writing goals, it helps empower them. What we also need to be doing is providing direct, explicit instruction on, for example, how do we make appropriate spaces? And then we can set that up as a goal for our students. All right. Before we move on to the sentence instruction, are there any burning questions that you have right now that you would like to have answered? If so,
I did figure out how to mute people on entry.
Okay.
So
Okay.
hopefully it's fixed now.
Okay. If so, you can unmute now. Otherwise, we're going to.
Let's see. People are asking if there's a PowerPoint to the presentation, but as we talked about, that's property of Keys to Literacy. So we'll definitely get the, go ahead.
Yeah, it is Keys to Literacy property. And I would encourage you to consider, if you like the content, to consider purchasing the Keys to Early Writing book that has this in it. I'm going to share with you at keystoliteracy.com. There's a free resource section, and you can get some of this there as well.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Let's jump right into this sentence instruction piece. All right. So when we're thinking about sentences, we have these really specific goals. We want to help support comprehension. We're going to do that by trying to really make a strong reading-writing connection. Then we're going to provide direct, explicit instruction for students in sentence basics. So we're going to teach them that there are 2 parts of sentences. And we're also going to teach them that there are 4 types of sentences. We're going to encourage them as they get this new learning to practice it, multiple opportunities for a rehearsal. And what our goal is, not that they can just name for us the 4 different types of sentences, but they're actually use those in their writing. They, as a writer, are making decisions now that they know and understand these 4 different types of sentences as to how they can bring those into their work. Okay. At the same time, we are developing an awareness of grammar. Okay. And again, the grammar instruction and isolation is not our goal. Our goal is really, how can we take that grammar instruction and help translate it so that students are transferring it into their actual writing? Okay. Good. Now, this web is fantastic. And I would encourage you to use something like this in your own classroom. You could have a sentence center up and going all the time and just rotate through all of these different activities on an ongoing basis. So when we're thinking about sentences, we're going to break it down into these two categories. One is going to be on sentence basics, and that includes the 2 parts and the 4 types. We're also going to talk about ways to develop syntactic awareness. And to do that, we talk about using a sentence scramble, sentence elaboration, and sentence combining. Okay. So we'll, for all of these, be really mindful of the gradual release of responsibility and thinking about the direct explicit instruction, the opportunity for guided practice, for oral rehearsal in that we stage, and then the release into the you. We know that how things look at kindergarten are not the same as how they look at 1st grade. That's not the same as how they look at 2nd grade. So for all of these pieces that I'm going to share with you, really have your instructional objective in mind and think about the task and ask yourself, all right, what is it that I want my students to know and be able to do as a result of each of these activities? And then, like with everything, think about what scaffolds you need to put into place and how might you differentiate the activity based on the needs of who's in front of you. Okay. So let's start with our teaching sentence basics. All right, we've already mentioned this. We're making a strong reading, writing connection. When we talk about text structure is important. It refers to how a piece of writing is built. And the reason why that matters is because what the research tells us is that when students have an understanding of text structure, it impacts both their comprehension as well as their written expression. So we like to use the Lego analogy and say that when you are writing, you are building your own text, you're constructing the text. And in order to do that really well, what you can do is you can deconstruct somebody else's text, takes that apart. Notice what moves they're making. So we want to be able to look at this from the perspective of a reader and a writer. Okay. So we start really basic with these 2 sentence parts. Now, what we encourage our partner schools and districts to think about is having a standardized convention for naming these parts. Okay. So at Keys to Literacy, we're calling them naming and action parts. You don't have to call them that, but whatever you decide at your district, school, what we want to do is have consisting naming convention, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, so that as the kids are moving through, it's a consistent language for them. Okay. So when we're thinking about this, what kinds of activities could we use? We're going to build all of our activities today.
It's enough for today.
Okay. Almost. If you're not on mute, if you could do that, that would be super helpful.
Thank you. Oh, great.
Okay. All right. So One Tiny Turtle here is what we use. It's a great book by Nicola Davies. What we want to think about is, again, if you ground this in pieces that you're already reading with kids, think about the value in terms of vocabulary and comprehension in the repeated exposures to the text in the practicing that happens with the sentences. Okay. So let me start by showing you a very basic categorizing activity. Now, when COVID hit, we learned a lot about Jamboard. And so you could do this as a Jamboard. You could do it in your classroom on your board. You can do it in a pocket chart, but essentially you would have 2 buckets, a naming bucket and the action bucket. And you would read the Post-it notes or however you have them captured for the kids, and the kids would decide, turtle, is that naming or action? Naming, great. travels, naming or action. So they can practice just categorizing the naming and action parts. To take it a step further, we could now move into doing this on actual cards. And so cardstock, you could have the naming part in one color, and you could have the action part in another. And you could give students the naming part, so sea turtles, for example, and then have them match what would make sense. Sea turtles is about loggerheads. Sea turtles travel thousands of miles. Okay, so here you're giving them one naming part and they choose which of the two action parts best meets the needs. Okay. In the second piece, now it's getting a little more challenging. Now you're providing two naming parts and you're providing two action parts, and they need to match those up. Okay. When you look at these cards, you can think about, all right, how are they scaffolded to support kids? Well, the first way is really obvious, by color, right? But then we are also using a capital letter and we're using punctuation at the end as scaffolds, okay? As a more challenging activity, you could actually have kids add a sentence part. So they could do this collaboratively in small groups, ultimately independently, but here you provide them either the naming part or the action part, and they generate the complete sentence. Now, this acts as a comprehension piece as well, because the sentence that they generate should be related to the content that was in whatever your mentor text. Sorry, I'm getting the hiccups. Okay. Now, as a more advanced activity, so you could start thinking about this in second grade. We can start saying, okay, if you've developed something, students, and it's not a complete sentence, that is called a fragment. And so when we look at that sentence or fragment, we can start doing some sorting around that as well. The goal here is not until fourth grade would students be expected to be able to recognize and correct fragments, but just for them to be thinking about, okay, why isn't this a sentence if it's a fragment? What's missing from it? Isn't a naming part, isn't an action part that's missing? Okay. All right, so that's our two parts of the sentence. Now let's move into our 4 types of sentences. So the idea here is, again, that there are these 4 types of sentences. Good writers think strategically about when they want to use different kinds of sentences, okay? And the goal is that the standards, by the end of first grade, students would know the 4 different types of sentences and the punctuation that goes along with it. So what we want to do again is, it's not that we need our first graders to be able to list imperative and exclamatory and declarative. What we want them to be thinking about is, when they go to write something, what would be the best kind of sentence to use so that the message that they're trying to convey gets across to their reader, okay? And punctuation is a really powerful way to be able to share your message with your reader, okay? This can be taught during ELA. And the way you would teach it during your ELA time would be that you're noticing how writers are using punctuation marks in the pieces that you're reading, as well as during the writing block, okay? So I want to share some different center activities for you around the types of sentences. So the first activity is having students actually sort sentences into each type. So remember the slide that I showed you that said that you want to think about who's in front of you and what are your needs, right? So here in this activity, students are not being asked to generate the sentences themselves. They're just sorting them, okay? And this activity is scaffolded by giving them the type of sentence as well as the ending punctuation. These are all related to one tiny turtle, and they are going to then categorize those words. Here, students are actually working on sentences that embed their spelling words in them, and they are categorizing those sentences that have the spelling words in it into the 4 types. Yet another center activity. Here, students have to identify what is the type of sentence and what is the end punctuation. This is a really nice activity for you to be able to use in centers where kids can manipulate the different parts of the sentences. And especially for those that actually struggle with transcription skills, such as handwriting or spelling. Again, they're not being asked at this time to actually generate all these different types of sentences. It's really about manipulating them and getting practice with determining how to tell what kind of a sentence it is. Now this is very complex. So now we're getting into changing the sentence around. So I would encourage you to consider doing this with each word on a Post-it note when you first get started, so that kids can start physically manipulating these parts. So if you're at the turtle arrives on the beach, how can you turn that into a question? So now we have to think about, okay, we don't actually have a question word here. So as a scaffold, maybe you provide when or where, and students get to choose which question word they want to bring in, and then what punctuation would go at the end. Take the question, have you ever seen a turtle? And decide, okay, now which of these words am I going to bring into my sentence? What other words will I need to put in there as well? And then you can go. And this is a really complex sentence. I have seen a turtle might be the way that some of your kids answer. They may add, I have seen a turtle in Jupiter, Florida. And some high flyers might add, I have seen a turtle in Jupiter, Florida last year. Okay. Does a sea turtle move quickly in the water? Yes, comma, sea turtles race through the water. So this is obviously a more advanced 2nd grade example, but you can see on how even doing this as oral rehearsal opportunities for kids to practice that syntactic awareness and the movement of the different words to go from statement to question, question to statement, really takes that flexibility. Okay. Now here's a 4th activity. And here kids are creating and writing sentences. So they happen to be studying this in social studies. They had to create each one of each type of sentence from the read aloud, and then use the different ending punctuation marks here. Okay. Good. For your 1st and 2nd graders at this point of the year, you may be able to have them actually go in and find examples of the different types of sentences and then categorize them as well. Okay. And here you can see they've actually added what page they found the information on in their books. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about sentence frames. What we often see teachers do is they'll leave out the verbs, which is a fine place to start. But what I want you to also think about is how can you keep going with your sentence frames, but then get a little bit further into some of these examples. So for example, could you have the loggerhead turtles swim? And then we're looking for a where phrase. Where do they swim? They swim under the coral. They swim around the seaweed. They swim towards the shore. So helping them use some of those more advanced prepositional phrases with lots of direct, explicit instruction, modeling, and think aloud for them. Same thing with time-related prepositional phrases. When I was in the classroom, I would always draw a big clock for my kids, and we would label the clock time with the numbers, but then we would also talk about morning or early morning or late morning and afternoon and dawn and dusk. And we would not all at once, but over the course of the year, be able to build these different time-related prepositional words and phrases so that they could then practice embedding them to make their writing stronger, with the goal of having their reader understand the message that they're trying to send. Okay, we're also going to talk a little bit later around how can we do some sentence combining work, and how can we help kids be able to use those little words like and, but, and or. How do we use because to help them combine sentences to make these compound and complex sentences as they grow. Okay, so let's take a little pause. So in the chat, can you just type in so Courtney and I can look? What was one aha around the sentence basics, or a question that might be swirling for you, or a takeaway, overall reaction? So let's just pause for a minute and let's see what goes into chat. The stuff that you're asking around spelling is really important. And so, as I said, what I'm showing you is 1 hour out of a 12-hour training. During the other 11 hours in the training, we do talk about the value of transcription skills and helping kids with direct explicit instruction around spelling, around handwriting, right? So that we know they need those pieces as well. And it's not an either or preposition. Not preposition. my mind is in grammar. Proposition, right? That we want to be addressing both the transcription skills as well as the composing skills. So we need to keep both of those going. Yes. I'm trying to see where our questions go here. Okay. Question. Christina, your question about the sentence fragment, that is just according to the Common Core standards by 4th grade. Remember I said, if you are thinking about the writing progression that you're using with kids, I really encourage you to look at those language standards, K-5, and where the sentence fragment comes in is around 4th grade. But it doesn't mean that that's when we start teaching it. It means that by 2nd grade, you can start some exposure to, this is not a complete sentence yet. And when it's not a complete sentence, we call it a fragment. But the expectation would be by the end of 4th grade that they can identify fragments and correct them.
Okay, and that there was another one. When would you start teaching sentence types?
Yeah, so I think that you can start teaching the basic sentence types. We do that in kindergarten, right? And as we grow into into statement and question, we can then continue to grow with the exclamation, right? And the command may be more towards 1st grade. But the idea is we have these different punctuation marks because writers want their readers to understand what they're trying to say. And when you use those different exclamation marks, the message sounds different, right? So we're really trying to enable kids to see that grammar doesn't live in isolation. It's not about a worksheet, right? But that we want to provide direct explicit instruction in those sentence types as well as the ending punctuation, so that when they encounter them in text, when they are reading, they understand what they're meant to do, as well as when they are constructing the text, when they are the writers, how to be able to use those effectively. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Anything else in there, Courtney?
There was one more a ways back. Would you teach the naming and doing outside of writer's workshop time?
So what we want to think about with particularly with our K-2 writing instruction, is that there are some things that would best be taught during writing instruction time. So you'd want to build their background knowledge on the naming and action parts during your writing time. It doesn't mean, though, if you are reading any kind of book with them, that you couldn't ask them to identify a naming or a action part within a sentence that you identified in that text that you are already reading. But most likely that direct explicit instruction that they need would happen during their writing time.
And I think some of what you're saying might feel like you're moving slower to teachers at first because they're used to trying to write whole paragraphs. But then if you can learn how to write a sentence, then that will make it better overall later.
Yeah, I really feel like we rushed a little bit too fast to get to paragraph. And it's the same thing with drawing. For those of you who are teaching kindergarten and first grade, drawing has real value. And the piece about the drawing, where the more details they add, the more words they're going to have, the more ideas that they'll have to share. That sets up the foundation for them to be able to then transfer it over into these phrases and then complete sentences. So we need to be aware of the value that those things hold, as well as the value of taking time with sentences. So we also have a key to content writing, which is for grades 3 through 12. And even in that, grades 3 through 12, we talk about the power of sentence combining, because research really shows that sentence combining is one of the most effective writing practices that you can put into place through 12th grade. And the value there is that because, as we said, one by one, sentences make meaning, that the complexity of the ideas, so as kids grow in grade levels, they learn how to move those sentences and words around to really make their message strong. And that work needs to start here, and it has to continue all the way through 12th grade.
That's exciting to think about.
It is exciting. I get so excited about this.
There,
all right.
Let me see. One more question. Would you teach nouns before this or during this?
I think you would try to teach them at the same time that you're talking about that naming part, so that they're making a connection there. Yeah.
Okay. And then someone asked, and you can see if you have time for this later, or now, I would love for Lisa to expand even more on the concept of drawing for K1. I don't know if that has time for tonight or not.
Courtney, I actually had drawing in here, but then I thought we said we're going to talk about sentences. So maybe we could do a second part to talk about oral language and drawing, because I feel like those cannot be underestimated. And at Keys to Literacy, we really try to have a strong awareness of where kids are developmentally and to acknowledge what's best for them. And drawing plays a huge piece in that.
All right, I'm writing that down.
All right. Okay, so let's keep going. And now let's look at the other side of our web, the developing syntactic awareness. So as we're thinking about this developing syntactic awareness, right, we can kind of use it as an informal assessment. So as I was mentioning to you earlier, if you were to say, daddy calls mommy or mommy called daddy, could kids understand the difference? And typically around age 2, they can tell. Now, you could also ask students, which sounds better, swims the turtle or the turtle swims? They might not be able to identify what exactly is wrong with it, but they could tell you which one. If they could tell you which one sounds better, it means that they have developed some syntactic awareness. If they can't, that's an indicator that there's some lack of that oral language exposure that is helping them understand the correct syntactic kind of functioning of sentences. Okay. So we're going to talk about these 3 different types: the sentence scramble, sentence elaboration, and sentence combining. Our goal is to give kids many, many different opportunities for them to practice manipulating the different parts of sentences. Okay. And can you see how in doing that, they're going to start to hear how strong sentences are built. Okay. And it's helpful for all, but especially helpful for our English language learners as well. Okay. Let's start with the sentence scramble. So the sentence scramble basically is when kids are manipulating different words to make complete sentences. And it can look lots of different ways. Okay. So we have dog, like, the, to sit. You can see that we're combining both pictures and words here. Okay, and the goal is that we want kids to be able to manipulate these parts. Now, when you are thinking about how am I going to build these sentence scrambles, I want to encourage you to, and take this with a grain of salt, but to not go to teachers pay teachers. What I want you to think about is, what is the content that you're already using in your classroom? What books are you already reading? What pieces instructionally do you have for your phonics program, for example? And use those words, concepts, etc., to be able to build these sentence scramble activities with your kids. It's really fun to scramble your morning meeting message. Okay. You can think about providing kids with a set of steps. I'm going to share one with you that you can download for free at keystoliteracy.com. And initially, we as teachers, we're going to generate the sentences, but then you're going to let students, when they gain their proficiency, they create their own sentences and have somebody else try to unscramble their sentences. So let me show you a set of steps for this first. And again, you can get this at keystoliteracy.com. But remember, a set of steps is a template. It is a scaffold. It's a scaffold. And the idea with the scaffold is that you're really providing kind of a task analysis of what steps do you need to take. So here's the set of steps for kids. And then this is the template that they receive that goes along with it. Okay. And this template is also scaffolded because we have our pictures here to help cue along, right? At the bottom, this is where you would write the words. And if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words are too many, you don't have to use all 5. If 3 makes sense, use 3. If your second graders at a point that they can write their own sentences, allow them to do that. So again, you're thinking about your students who are in front of you and what would be the best way for you to utilize this activity with them. And let's look at some examples. So here's a little one with a turtle, and the sentence was, the turtle swims. And she's getting there, right? She's getting there. Now, here is an example from some students who were doing some different sentence scrambles, and they were all about fish. Fish was the unit that they were doing. And together, once they put these sentences together, this formed a nice paragraph for them. Now, one of the best things about writing to me is that there's not just one right answer. There are many different ways as writers that we can get our message to our audience, right? So here's an example that comes from the Very Hungry Caterpillar. And in this first example, I'm going to start over here. The words were, you can take just one. And so this student did a cupcake and they wrote, you can take just one. Now this student did some ice cream, and this student said, you can just take one. Both syntactically appropriate examples, right? Now this student is thinking about lollipops, and this student added, she did some elaboration. You can take just one lollipop. And nice job of having the ending punctuation also come after lollipop. So this is clearly a student who has that awareness of where the punctuation goes in the sentence. Okay. Now, do not do an example like this. I did this in a second grade classroom as a model lesson, and these are too many words. So I always feel like as a teacher, my experience is it's good to share with other teachers, learn from mistakes that we make. But these were too many. This was a sentence that comes right from that book. And the line of kids, every kid was holding a card. It basically started at one end of the classroom and it went to the end. So you just want to be aware of that. Starting off really simple, move into more complex sentences. And then you can also consider the capitalization or the color coding. Some start the first word with green, put the last word with red. And then if you're doing multi-sentences, like at second grade, for example, you might have one sentence in one font and another sentence in another, and then the kids are sorting that way, okay? This is too difficult though. All right, so now let's move into elaboration. So when we talk about sentence elaboration, the goal is to expand the sentence, but in a way that is meaningful, in a way that's going to help the reader understand what we are trying to elaborate and tell them about in our sentences, okay? In order to do that, one way you can help kids think about this is to say, sometimes as readers, we have questions for the writer that we'd like to ask, but often the writer's not around to ask them. So what you want to try and do is think of what kinds of questions might a reader have when they look at your sentence. And to do that, we use some scaffolds. So we have these W questions that I'm going to share with you. And we can also provide some word lists and talk about expanding kernel sentences. What I want you to really think about is how can we use this as a tool during revision? Because revision is really hard, right? Revision is hard because we've already written it once. What else is there to say about it? So the idea with sentence elaboration is that after you've written everything, you can then use those question cards, or you can do it with a partner or a teacher, to ask other questions about your work. So at keys2literacy.com in the free resource center, you can download these cards. And so they're scaffolded. So we have who, and then we have these words that might follow to generate some different questions that we may have about a writer's work. We can also use pictures. Pictures are so powerful because they help with the language retrieval. So if we just say the turtle swims, we're leaving it up to the student to generate an image of what it looks like when the turtle swims. If we can provide a picture for them, and then we can use those W cards, where is this turtle swimming, right? And look, what do we call this? Oh, this is seaweed, this is kelp, right? So now we're really using that picture to help provide more language for our students. And like with the word kelp, the picture helps to encourage kids to use that more academic vocabulary. Again, we do this during oral rehearsal because the oral rehearsal gives them the opportunity to say it, to hear it before we would expect that they would be able to actually do it in writing, okay? Now, we also have some templates that we use to help kids expand. So if you had a simple subject predicate, you could have it here. We could have our questions here, and then we could add some notes about it. What we're not going to do is write complete sentences here, okay? We write the complete sentence down here. Let me show you an example of this. So if the kernel sentence was the turtle swims, what turtle? The green turtle swims. Now I'm even getting a better picture in my mind. Now I can see that green turtle. And now I want to ask you this. How is that green turtle swimming? Fast. Okay, good. The green turtle swims fast. So this seems really simple, but what it does is it grows your students as writers, and they then start to internalize these questions that good writers anticipate that their audience will be asking to be able to get a stronger picture in their mind. If we tell them, oh, you need to make a better picture in my mind, but we don't explain to them how that happens, there's no direct, explicit instruction around these question terms, for example, then it just becomes really frustrating. And we want our students to really feel like they are empowered to make decisions in their writing and that they understand how to make their writing even stronger. That it's not that everything you write as the teacher magically goes from your head onto a piece of paper. You're actually doing some of this thinking as well. So that piece is important. Okay. And there we go. And so this is what the revision looks like. The turtle swims, cross this out because we thought of something else we want to add. The turtle swims fast. And I want to encourage you to really think about, would you need this student to rewrite this whole sentence now because they've crossed out the period and they've added fast? For me, the answer is not necessarily. Right? Because part of the problem with writing is, especially for our youngest writers, they are juggling both the mastery of the transcription skills as well as trying to get the composing of the thoughts. So I would say that it's not about a paper looking perfect all the time. It's about getting that idea down. And yes, absolutely. Sometimes we have audiences that we need to have a very polished piece for, but not every time and not to the frustration of our students. I think being at the Landmark School for a long time really helped me to have empathy for students who struggle with writing and to look at, even if their composition of thought is very strong, when they go to get it down and those transcription skills are getting in the way, that's just so frustrating to them. So we really want to balance that out. Okay. Good. All right. And now here's a really advanced second grade example. Remember that clock that I was showing you? We get past like 10 p.m. We can start talking about how that's now late at night. Right? So our when phrase is late at night and our where phrase is in the ocean. And now we have lots of different ways that we can put this sentence together. And again, not one is right and another is wrong. There are lots of different ways for writers to share their messages. Okay. Good. And then here are just some more examples of adding where phrases and when phrases. And then students, it's so powerful for them that they can put together these really strong sentences when they understand how they're built. Remember those Legos that I was showing you, those building blocks, right? Okay. And then here's an example, first grade, having the who, what, where, when, why. Grandpa walked. Who? My old grandpa. What? He walked the dog. Really? Where? At the park. When? 2 p.m. What's another way we can say 2 p.m.? In the afternoon. Why did he do that? Because he wanted exercise. So again, a lot of this can live in oral language and oral rehearsal with you doing the scribing for kids until they're at the point where they are ready to move into doing the work by themselves. At which point they can start to, what we would say, rearrange their puzzle pieces here to decide what would be the best way to put this sentence together. How can I most effectively convey my message to the reader? Okay. And then I would really like you to think carefully about this part. And I know I'm watching the clock, Courtney. We want to have a little question and answer at the end. But when you're thinking about these connecting words, really think about how can you help kids understand what's the difference between and but, or because and or. For many students, they really don't understand that. And it's important that they have a lot of direct, explicit instruction. We don't commit a suicide, right? About what we think they already know. We really want to show them how these small words make a big difference in sentences. Okay, so you wouldn't introduce these all at once. You're going to think about this gradual introduction, and you're going to think about who's in front of you and what would be best for them. And then you're going to go into your mentor text. You're going to read like a writer. And you're going to find different examples how other writers use these little words. Okay, because they make a big difference. Okay, so here we are. We have talked about our sentence scrambles and sentence elaboration. We have an aha question takeaway. Pause for a minute. You can put something into the chat. All right, Courtney, I just have sentence combining left. If chat's not blowing up right now, maybe we just finish our sentence combining and then, okay, good. All right, so let's talk about sentence combining because it's really important. We know it improves students' ability to manipulate and rearrange words, to expand, clarify, tighten, make stronger their sentences. Starting back in the 1960s, consistently, research has found that this is an effective method to help grow students as writers. And as I talked about earlier, for kindergarten all the way through college. We're going to start it at oral language with oral language, and then we'll move into the written form. Okay. So when you're thinking about basic examples of sentence combining, we can say birds can eat baby sea turtles, fish can eat baby sea turtles. I know that sounds grim, but that's part of what happens in the One Tiny Turtle book. Okay. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to find a way to combine these examples. So here, I saw someone said they're going to pull their pocket chart out, which is really a great idea. Here, I would encourage you to have these lined up on, okay, I cut the slide, but have each word on its own index card. So write out birds can eat baby sea turtles. Right underneath that, put fish can eat baby sea turtles, so that the students can see which words are repeated in both sentences. And what we want to do is take out one set of the repeated words. Okay, so now we're left with birds can eat baby sea turtles, fish. Okay, now what we want to think about is, could you offer students a word? And great. Okay, so what if we were to say birds and fish can eat baby sea turtles? Does that work? Yes, it does. If we were to say baby sea turtles eat birds and fish, does that work? It works grammatically, but is that what we read about in our book? No, it's not. So do you see how these repeated exposures to the vocabulary as well as the content serve to enhance the comprehension as well? Okay, so as you go through the sentence combining, you're going to start really simply, and then you're going to move into more complex examples. Okay, and clearly that bullet number 4 is the most complex example. But what I want you to be thinking about is how this foundational work that you're doing in kindergarten, first and second grade really serves students well as they continue to move through the elementary into the middle and high school grades. Okay. Now, we can also think about doing some sort of close activity here where we're providing word banks. And now students have to make some decisions about what word would be better, and or however. So, but, right? So now they are not writing all of these sentences, but they are using their syntactic awareness to really determine which word would best fit in the given sentence. Okay. All right. So this is it. I hope that you are now thinking a little bit more about how their sentence knowledge improves their comprehension in writing. I hope you heard things tonight that validate good practices that you're already doing, and maybe one or two things that you would consider adding to your practice or refining your own practice to see if that would help to build your students' proficiency in writing sentences. I wanted to tell you that we do have a 2-day Keys to Early Writing training coming up on June 22nd and 23rd. We do have one that is at the end of this month, but it's already full. So we've opened up a new session for June 22nd and 23rd. I saw someone ask, can you buy the book outside of the PD? Absolutely. And you can register at keystoliteracy.com. There's an events page there. And really, I would encourage you to check out all of the free resources today. We were really living in early writing, but there are also comprehension free resources on the website, vocabulary. And Joan Sedita, who's the founder of Keys to Literacy, she does great blog posts, and you can find those on our Literacy Lines blog, which is excellent. She's always responding to hot topics, putting in great hyperlinks, resources for you to check out. So
Yay.
Thanks, everybody. Courtney, you want to add?
Yeah, well, I just want to say this makes me super excited to take that training that you just mentioned in the summer. So hopefully other people will sign up for that too. And we do have a couple more questions. Do you want to ask them, or would you want me to ask them, or?
Yeah, did you look in the chat for questions? You have some? Yeah, if you want to say them, then that's fine.
So someone said, would you do this with your teaching? I lost that one. Oh, okay. We'll skip that one. So someone said they teach writing and grammar, but from what you're saying, you should also be teaching sentence structure, or they teach sentence writing and grammar, but also you should be doing that in your writing time, not just grammar time.
Yeah, so we really want to think about, they absolutely need the direct explicit instruction and practice. The more we can ground that in the concepts that you're already teaching in science, social studies, and your language arts time, as well as when they go to write, we want them to be able to transfer those grammatical concepts actually into their writing. And so in order for them to do that, one of the things that we know is they have to understand what the value is. So that's where like the punctuation that I was talking about, right? How a reader reads your work really is influenced by the kind of punctuation marks that you use. Are you surprised? Is it an exclamation? Are you asking a question? Those kinds of things. So when they understand the value and they don't just see it as a worksheet, it really is helpful. And to read like a writer so that they are noticing the moves that other writers make.
And kind of going with noticing the moves of other writers, someone asked, are there any additional mentor texts you would recommend, especially kindergarten, for more sentence work? Yes, and what I want to say to you is you already know some really good books that you use in your classrooms. Maybe now what it is looking at that from the perspective of a writer. And so in kindergarten, it's really nice to do different author studies or even illustrator studies, right? Where we're really looking at the illustrations and noticing how the illustrations are meant to give the reader a message. How do you feel when you look at those pictures, right? What is the writer trying to show you? So rather than give you an extensive list, what I would encourage you to do is think about what books are you already using? What books might you have to use depending on what your curriculum is? And how can you reshape the lens through which you're looking at those? Okay. If we do, I mean, I am, but if we do take the Keys to Early Writing training, is there more of a scope and sequence in that? Yes. So, and remember that this is not a program. So we don't give you like daily lessons, right? It's really about, we take these big ideas in writing, like the oral language piece, like the sentences, like text structure, and we really help to build your background knowledge so that you're solid in why would you take the time to teach this so that when you look at the tools that you have in front of you, you can really utilize those most effectively to meet your own students' needs. Okay. Right. the question that I wrote down wrong, Trisha reposted it, thankfully, says, would you use the sentence building while teaching drawing and the teacher does the scribing, or after drawing, do you do sentence building?
I think you can do it at the same time, In our drawing kind of part of Keys to Early Writing, what we talk about is the importance of direct explicit instruction in drawing. How do we make a circle? How do we make a square? How do you make a triangle? And then how can you use those shapes to convey the ideas that you have to your audience? How do you get them down? So by starting simple with that, right, the drawing piece, you can at the same time be exposing them to different sentence work, and you are doing the writing for them. So they can happen simultaneously.
Right, okay. And there's just one last question. Is journal writing worth the time?
Yes, absolutely. What is stumbling for kids sometimes is if the journal writing is always open-ended and they don't really honestly know what to write about, that can cause a lot of anxiety. So I would encourage, when you think about journaling, a couple things, depending on where you are in terms of grade level, providing space for drawing, right? And the drawing can come first. And the idea is, remember, the drawing is going to provide the language opportunity from which the sentences would be developed. So when we talk about that progression in drawing, we talk about how can we move kids from drawing into then labeling their own drawing, right? Or labeling somebody else's work. But now we're starting to connect words to those pictures. And that is an important piece to get to that sentence progression that we were looking at.